involved in this issue. And with that, would you help me welcome Jim Strain?
You know, can you hear me back there? I had a statement I wanted to make at the conclusion of my presentation. But I think it's appropriate that I make this statement right now because you people need to hear it. John says we're a long way from vertical integration. I think we're in vertical integration right now, and I think you people are paying the price. Now let me tell you why I say that. I got acquainted with one of these poultry growers from Alabama that was as smart a man as I ever met in my life. The guy was a retired military guy, a young man, made a successful career as a helicopter pilot, fought in Vietnam, put his life on the line every day. He come back, and he was a young man. He didn't want to hang it up, so he went into the poultry business. And his first contract was a fairly generous contract. He told me it takes $40 million to build one of those poultry processing plants. It takes $40 million in barn investment to feed that plant. The integrator, the processor, makes the plant investment. The little farmer out there who's trying to scrape out a living makes the barn investment on borrowed money. His first contract was easy contract, short-term contract. Now, everything's working copacetically till it comes time for the second contract. Second contract, they put the screws to the guy a little bit. He's already borrowed money, doesn't have much choice. What they have done is they have taken an $80 million investment. They've made half of that investment, $40 million. And like Herman said at his outset, if everything works just right, the producer gets 3%. That's where they've got it screwed down to now. The processor makes 30, 35%. Which end of the poultry integration would you want to be on? Which part of it? We're getting closer to the poultry thing all the time. Now, today, we have vertically integrated a number of these major feedlots, like Cactus in Texas, which is Paul Linkler's outfit, with a 350,000 one-time capacity, National Farms with big capacity, and a lot of others, including Don Smith, the Tribune, Kansas, who was on that commission. These cattle are locked into that system without IVP. They all go to IVP. Others up are doing the same thing without ever pouring 1 yard of concrete, setting one pole, or buying a feed pump. These people have become the biggest cattle feeders in the country. Zero investment. It's the greatest game in town. And we are so close to that, and our position, and believe me, I'm a believer in the democratic process. This is a debate today of different ideas. Our perspective is 180 degrees different than the National Cattlemen Association. They are proponents. They are proponents of vertical alignment, vertical integration. And I'll tell you what, when they set the price, when corporations set the price of finished cattle, and they're setting them today, they set the price of feeder cattle for every ranch in the country. The vertical integration and the control goes beyond the feedlot and comes back to these ranches. They're controlling your price today. The only variable in the whole thing is the cost to gain on these cattle by cost of grain. They'll trap you and make you a serf on your own land, just like they've done with those poultry growers and their decent people. I'm going ahead with the rest of this now. All right. This little diagram here, and I gave it to the folks in Washington on this concentration commission. The top line reflects the price consumers pay for choice beef. Not select, but choice. Now, Cattle Facts takes issue. This is from the Economic Research Service, which is a division of the United States Department of Agriculture, and they track these prices constantly throughout the nation. Now, Cattle Facts is going to say that this top line is not representative because it doesn't include select, which is a lower grade than choice, and it doesn't include the amount of beef that's sold on spatial in the United States. I'm not going to argue that. But it also doesn't include the 50% of the meat that goes into the hotel, restaurant, and institutional trade and to export, which cream, the best. See, it doesn't include that. So I think it's closer to really the average of what it should, than what Cattle Facts is going to say. Cattle Facts should get together with the Economic Research Service and work this thing out if they want to. That's their problem. My purpose here today is to illustrate something to you folks. The price of finished cattle should correlate to some degree with the price of retail beef. Wouldn't you say? It should. Retail beef prices, really folks, I'd appreciate it if you didn't applaud. I'm not here for an ego trip. I'm here to debate these issues toe-to-toe with anybody, any place, any time, because there's a hell of a lot of these people in here that are getting short-shrifted. And that's the purpose of this deal here, as far as I'm concerned. Now, who stands between the consumer and the cattle feeder? Two entities, right? One of them is the packer. The other one is the retailer. But remember, the retailer only sells half of the beef that's produced in this country, approximately. Now, I say that we're not getting our fair share of the retail beef dollar, and that other portion that goes on the right. How do we get it? We get it through the sale of fat cattle. How many of you people are cattle feeders? Probably about 2 or 3%. How many of you guys are ranchers? Guys that own the surface of this earth? A heck of a lot of them, right? And you're the guys that need to pay attention to this. You got to fight this packer to take some of this share back to our end of the business. If you get these finished cattle up, you get the price of the feeder cattle up. It's just pretty basic. But you've got to have a good system for marketing these cattle. The one thing that has compromised price competition more than anything else is this captive supply, or strategic alliances, or whatever you want to call it. You got to make this packer. You're down to 3 of them for all practical purposes. You got to fight them every inch of the way. Every inch of the way. You got to sell them every animal. You can't give them any. You got to sell them to them. It's a tough, competitive world. That packer's in business to make money. I'm in business to make money. You're in business to make money. That retailer is in business to make money. It's a natural thing. Now, I want to go ahead with the next one, but bear this in mind. Let's go back to that other just a second, John. Take another look at this. Whenever the market is headed down, the packer's margin widens out. Can you see that? It's pretty easy to see that. Now, you don't have to change that very much in order for millions of dollars to change hands. This is a high-volume business. It doesn't take much of it, but the packer's margin is usually the widest when he's got the market on the run. That's when he can get the most out of it. And these boys know how to get her on the run, believe me. Okay, go ahead with the next one. Now, how many of you people have heard about oversupply of beef here lately? Oversupply of beef. God, we get bombarded with that stuff every day, don't we? It makes me fight mad because I don't believe it. Now, this is Economics 101. How many of you guys are college educated, you people? How many of you had any economics in college? Like just a semester or two. Economics 101. Consumption and demand are not the same thing. You know, a lot of people say, well, they never dump any in the ocean. They don't haul any beef to the dump, and they don't. But that isn't demand. All production is always consumed. Right, it is. That's not demand. Demand is defined in terms of price and quantity. Price is a part of it. You remember what that other graphic just showed you? The price of retail beef is good. It's up there. A change in demand occurs when consumers purchase more of a product at the same or higher prices. I say there's been a fundamental change in demand for beef. It's been on the up. It was really down the tubes in about 1985 because every medical group in the country attacked it. Some of it was based on pseudo-science, false science. Some of it was based on truth. A lot of this beef had an awful lot of rind on it, a lot of plate weight. You know, the outside fat on a lot of beef then was a half-inch or better. The retailer started trimming it. He trimmed it first to a half. He saw that the consumer liked it, the guy's in business to make money. He did us a favor without us ever knowing it. The next trim he made was to a 1/4 inch. Today they're all advertising an 1/8 inch trim. The product that's out there today is a better product. That was a tasty product, but when you got done eating your meat, you had a lot of waste on your plate that you paid $3 or $4 a pound to, and that offended people. Rightfully so. But this is a different product. Another thing about it, and this is where maybe the checkoff deserves some credit, is that science has changed to a certain extent. There is not the anti-red meat attitude out there in the medical profession today that there was 10 years ago. And I would say that Chekhov probably had something to do with that. All right. Lower retail prices. We produce between 3 and 4% more beef in 95 than we did in 94. We all know that. Nobody's going to argue that. That's easy to track. Lower retail prices. Beef is considered an inelastic market. In an inelastic market, anytime you increase supply slightly, you got to lower price dramatically. See? In 1995, retail beef prices were steady with 1994. What's that telling you? That's telling you that demand is there. You know, people are skulking around with their tail between their legs. We got a Cadillac of meat. Ours is the preferred meat. It's the Cadillac of meat, and people eat it for one reason. It tastes great, doesn't it? It's a hell of a food, no joke about it. The position of the American Cattlemen's Association is that there's no oversupply of beef, and consumer demand for beef products is very robust, because the price tells you that. The retail price, not the live cattle price, that's telling you something else. I think you ought to amend that Lord's Prayer, Willie. You ought to put on there, P.S., Dear Lord, please help me to get a price that's based on supply and demand, not monopolistic power. I think that ought to be added to that cowboy's prayer. That's my honest feeling. Retail beef prices during all of 1995 would have accommodated live finished cattle prices about 70 cents. Show the first slide back, will you, Johnny? Now, why do I say that? It's not just something I picked out of the air. Look at the top line, folks. Now, look at back there at about 1992, 93. What were we getting for our fat cattle then, if you were a cattle feeder? You were getting in the high 70s or 80 bucks. Where was retail beef prices? They were lower then than they are about the same that they are now. Close to it. Somebody has widened their margins and it isn't the people in this room. Somebody has made a lot of money, haven't they? Look at the way that turns down there. This is up to July of 1995. Look at what happened to margins. For the first time in our history, the two middle people got more than 50% of the value of the beef animal. We got less than 50%, divided up between the three subsets of production. Let's go back to the other one, John. The problem with low live finished cattle prices, we believe, is the result of packer concentration, packer procurement strategies, and a very weak live finished cattle marketing system. That last one is our fault. It's the cattle feeder's fault that the marketing system is weak. Now, if you have an interest in this, if you're not a cattle feeder, you bet your life you've got an interest in it, because your livelihood's at stake. The price that you get depends on the competitiveness and the effectiveness of the marketing of these finished cattle, and that's where the problem is today. Go ahead, John, with the next one. Now, the packers and stockyards, John Lacey mentioned that the 1920 breakup. There was no breakup in the packers. 1920. They never broke the packers up. 1916, the Congress authorized the Federal Trade Commission the right to go in and thoroughly investigate the packing industry to make sure that it had not been monopolized, it was still competitive. They appropriated money to do that. The Federal Trade Commission hired outside experts and their own people. They made a thorough investigation, which they delivered to the Congress 4 years later, and that investigation including that the meat packing industry at that time had been monopolized. The five major packers at that time had 60% of the interstate trade in meat under their control. In 1995, the Big Four had 87%, the Big Three had 81%, the Big One, the 800-pound gorilla, has 38%. If you're wondering who that is, that's IBT. 38%. Almost as much, two-thirds as much as all of them had in 1920. In 1920, the Justice Department called in the Big Four packers, the fifth one had been bought out by one of the fourth ones, and said, you people have to divest yourselves of certain items. They had interest in the stockyards. They owned the refrigerated rail cars. Nobody could get in and compete with them. They had them froze out. You have to divest yourself of those things. You could go on packing meat. That was one of the most successful pieces of antitrust legislation that was, or action that was ever taken. within a matter of months, packing houses sprung up all over the United States. We went from having that big five, plus a few, quite a few smaller ones, to having lots of packing houses and lots of competition. The capitalistic system is a great system. I'm a strong proponent of it. The lifeblood of that system is competition. I don't care where at in American business, you've got to have competition. The greatest enemy of capitalism and the thing that will make it fail the fastest is monopoly. That is an enemy. We have a wonderful body of antitrust law in this country. Every word of that is meant for one thing, and that's to guarantee competition. That's what our antitrust laws are all about. Okay. Now, I got the congressional record, and I wanted to know about that debate that took place, because in 1921, the consent decree has been entered into, the Packers have divested themselves. Now the issue before the Congress is do we let the Federal Trade Commission monitor the meat business, or do we establish a new agency of government to monitor the meat business? Because it's critical. Meat is so critical in the human diet. They recognize it then. Food's so plentiful today, nobody thinks anything about it. But people knew the difference then. All right. The debate centered on that. There was a senator at the time named John B. Kendrick. He was Wyoming. Kendrick still owned a ranch out east of Sheridan. And I really liked it. This study of the transcript of the debate of Congress was terribly interesting. In three areas. Number one, it showed me how high-minded the people in that Senate were at that time. Senator Norris from Nebraska, Senator Cattlemen from North Dakota, Senator Kendrick here from Wyoming. Those people had vision. They knew that small producers like us had to have good marketing systems in order for us to survive and to produce food. Here's an excerpt from that. And the third thing that interested me was how the packers of that day had the wheels greased everywhere along the line, and the lubricant that they used was mud. See? And if they did it then, it's pretty reasonable to assume that these boys do it today and probably do it a little bit better, because that was 75 years ago. Now, here's a statement made by Senator Kendrick. This is from the congressional record. I want a commission that is eternally and continuously on the watch, and not one which will merely give its attention to the meat packing and livestock problems as incidental business. Not one from which the press of other duties will be compelled merely to review the findings of other and perhaps less able men. The magnitude of the packing industry is so great, and it is so tremendously important to the country that it cannot be treated as incidental business. I wish to say that nothing under the sun would do more to conduce to increase production in this country and ultimately to cheaper food products for the people of the nation than a dependable market. One wherein the producer would understand beyond the shadow of doubt that he was not merely getting what is called a fair market, but would get the market for his products based on the law of supply and demand. The average producer in this country is a pretty good sport. He's not afraid to take his chances, but he wants to know that he meets the other man on the dead level and does not have to go against stacked cards. That statement was made 75 years ago. That statement is as true today as it was then. You people are good sports. You're risk takers. You fight droughts, you fight tough winters, and you fight everything, and you'll win. Because you're tough and the country eventually will be good to you. But I'll tell you one thing, you cannot fight. You cannot fight monopoly. And that's our fight today. That's our fight today. Go ahead, John, if you would. Now, Packers and Stockyards Administration was established. It's a watchdog agency to make sure that there's competition in the production and marketing and so forth of meat. We running over, Jerry? All right. 1985 USDA publication entitled the Packers and Stockyards Act, Economic Law and Order in the Marketplace. The act was designed to, quote, assure economic law and order in the marketing of livestock, meat, and poultry, and to assure effective competition and integrity in the marketplace. That's been compromised today. Competition no longer exists for these finished cattle. 3 packers, 1 price, take it or leave it, and if you leave it, we'll kick your butt day after tomorrow. And they've been able to make it stay. Jens Knudsen, this is from a congressional hearing down in Huron, the Center for Press Rail. Jens Knudsen is the Director of Regulatory and Industry Affairs, American Meat Institute, the National Association representing meat packers and processors. He's their chief economist. He says this. Now, this guy's a big, pompous guy. He walked in there. He said, I'm an ag economist, and I'm going to shed some light on this. He started talking about oversupply. Like I'm going to guide you ignorant cowboys into the promised land. Well, he said it takes two to, they're talking about captive supply. It takes two to negotiate a price. We both have both sides willing to do that. Next comes Tommy Morris, Director of Packers and Poultry Division, Packers and Stockyards Administration, United States Department of Agriculture. This guy is supposed to be taken care of. Page 140, line such and such. It requires the voluntary support of both the livestock producer and the packer. There are two people on each side of these transactions. Both the above statements were in reference to captive supply arrangements. Now, our position is this, down at the bottom. The only measure, this doesn't legitimize the fact that two parties want to get into this. It doesn't legitimize it. Just, you know, we'll sell one another out in a New York minute. Cattle feeders sell the rancher out in a New York minute. Cattle feeder will sell his cattle feeder brother out down the road 5 minutes for $250. Who's supposed to keep that from happening? Packers and Stockyards Administration. You just saw the history. Our position is, we went ahead of it, that every animal has got to be bought competitively. Now, we wrote the Packers and Stockyards Administration, Jim Bob Baker, a letter. We referred him to Section 202. We say that the present situation, captive supply, is discriminatory against, it's unfair, bottom paragraph, unfair to and discriminates against all cattle people, and that we must have a competitive market in order to have a reasonable opportunity to receive a fair price for our production. I think that's a good statement. What kind of a letter do you think we got back? We got back an oversupply letter. Everybody's hiding behind oversupply. Cattle factories hiding behind it. NCBA's hiding behind it. Everybody, there's no oversupply in these cattle. That second one I showed you tells you that. Price tells you that. Believe that. People have felt guilty about overproducing the market. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Jeff,
Yeah.
we need to wrap up. Just, you know, we made a point of making sure that everyone's got the same amount of time. And
Okay, that's fair enough. I'll play by the game. Now, I'm going to ask you people, if you want to hear the rest of this, and the best is yet to come, I'll stick around here and I'll finish this up. You want to hear it?
Yeah.
All right. I want to go ahead with this because I think it's life and death. So I'll come back and I'll be a nice boy, Jerry. You're on a tight ship. What do you say, boys? You want to do it now or later? Yeah. All right. Just had a vote, Jerry. Now, I think in fairness to these guys that we're banging on so hard today, if they want a little more time, they ought to get it too. All right. Now, listen. Here's the outfit that's got 38% market share, IVP. They're good processors. They've proven themselves as a low-cost producer and so forth. They're all right. The guy told me, you need IVP. I said, we need IVP. Not one IVP, we need 10 little IVPs. That's what this business needs. Okay, they said this. This is a discussion in Feed Stuff magazine about captive supply. IVP invented the formula. That's the worst thing that's ever been invented. IVP noted, unlike its major competitors, does not feed cattle, which disadvantages the company's competitive position in the marketplace. Jens Knudsen makes another statement. Captive supply gives producers and packers a mechanism for locking in a market ahead of time. They eliminate for producers the often considerable uncertainty about price at some future time, and eliminate for packers some concern about supply flow. Our position is this. We believe that captive supply arrangements of any nature, be it formula, forward contract, or packer-owned fed cattle, greatly advantages the packer in the procurement of raw material and undermines the competitive market. By having any of its needs in hand without going after them competitively, the entire price discovery process is biased downward to the disadvantage of every level of cattle production in this country. The problem affects all cuts of beef production. When Mr. Knudsen speaks of eliminating for packers some concern about supply flows, he puts his finger squarely on the issue. The only leverage the cattle feeder has ever had in selling his production to the packers, the threat of interrupted supply to close, you remove or weaken that risk, and the balance of trading power shifts dramatically. Now, these packers pay a guaranteed 32 to 36 hours of labor a week. These plants are monsters. It takes a lot of energy to crank one of them up and so forth. The worst nightmare for a packing house is to run out of raw material, because all of the overhead costs roll on. Thing for him is to have to go out and give an up for cattle. He don't like that either. But of the two choices, he'll take the up. He'll give more for the cattle every time. As long as he's got this captive supply, you can't believe how big this is. I know for a fact, I wouldn't say it, that there's times that IBP can stay out of the market for 1 or 2 weeks. They've got these cattle coming at them. They don't have to go out and compete for them. It's totally destroyed our market. We'll never, one of my best friends, the man that knows more about the cattle business than any man I know, I'm talking about the cattle feeding and the packing business, told me 15 years ago, Jimmy said, if they ever get this forward contract and formula going, we'll never have a market again. His prophecy is done true. We'll never have a market till we stop these things. Now, lest people forget, this is an important statement. You know, these fellas talk about the industry. The industry, to me, is there's a number of industries. Number one, the packing industry is not part of the cattle industry. It's a manufacturing business. It's like a grain oil. It wants to get tonnage in one door and tonnage out the other door and get a little markup on it and keep the thing rolling. The cattle feeding industry is the same way. Ranching industry is an industry by itself. And at some point in time, at different times, each one becomes adversarial with the other. We are not one big happy family. Now, in 1994, at this Omaha meeting, 1,500 cattle people there, a fellow named Bob, we had a bad break. You know, we lose $10, $12 a hundred. Bingo, just like that. A guy by the name of Bob Cook, an attorney from Phoenix, Arizona, got up and said, IBP's manipulating the cattle business. They sell 1,000 futures contracts every Monday morning. They slam dunk the futures market and turn the cash market is slam dunk. He said, they've cost the industry $1 billion. You raised $2 million here today. I'll sue them. I'll get your $1 billion back. Well, next thing you know, IBP says, this man slandered us. We never sold 1,000 contracts on any money. We're taking you to court. We're going to slam dunk you, young lawyer from Phoenix. That's what they did. Well, I got the transcript. This is public information. I got this part of it as a reminder. I got a lot more of it. IBP Incorporated. The man on the stand is a fellow by the name of Kurt Pohl. He's their risk management guy. The attorney for Mr. Cook says, Mr. Pohl, is it always in IBP's best interest as you perceive those interests, Mr. Pohl, that it buy cattle for slaughter as inexpensively as possible? Answer, yes. Next question from Mr. Cook's attorney. Is there an exception that you can think of to that statement, a time when it would not necessarily be in IBP's interest to buy live cattle as inexpensively as it can? Answer, no. That's the real world, people. Strategic alliances and so forth are la-la land talk. You got to go toe-to-toe with this guy every time. Toe-to-toe with him. Go ahead, next, John. Got to get through this before Pete and Phil gets me over the head. Okay. NCA has publicly stated that competitive markets are definitely a priority. Good statement. NCA's position on competitive markets. We want to guarantee individual rights to participate in the free market system and the right to make business arrangements individually. That means you guys that are formulating your cattle and giving them to the packer, go right ahead and do it. That's what that means right there. See? Because if they don't say that, they're going to lose some big members. So they got to say it. IBP's response to a complaint filed against them by Packers and Stockyards Administration, they had these sweetheart deals with the cartel in Kansas. Cattle producers and packers should have the freedom to work together to market and purchase cattle in ways beneficial to them. Of course, it's beneficial to them. It's beneficial to the guy maybe who's selling cattle that day. It's beneficial to the packer who doesn't have to compete for his seed, but it's to your disadvantage. People don't think for a minute it isn't. NCA's position on trade reporting opposes mandatory price reporting, but does encourage more voluntary reporting. That's extremely important, people. Believe me. Go ahead. Everybody stand on their head. Let the blood go to your head and sit in your seat. Okay, we made recommendations. I think we made the only recommendations that were made to that concentration committee in Washington, D.C. We said this. We believe that P&S has the authority with Section 202 of the Packers and Stockyards Act to stop the packer from feeding cattle, forward contracting cattle, and buying cattle on a formula, and should exercise that authority immediately. 2, now, Congressman Johnson has got a piece of legislation, and I don't want to get into partisan politics, but I think Congressman Johnson's got a good bill, and it would do just that. TNS says, well, 202 isn't broad enough. Well, he's going to broaden it up to where it is broad enough. KLA has come out in opposition to it. NCA hasn't spoken out on it, but they're leaning in a certain direction. Herman mentioned who's supporting it, and I'll tell you, it's a critical bill. And I don't care whether it happens just like that or what. 2, price reporting of live finished cattle should be mandatory, different than NCA. It should be to an agency of the federal government. Sales should be reported by both parties to the transaction. With 10 minutes of the time of the transaction should be made public by the receiving agency immediately. Failure to report and fictitious reporting should be punishable by stiff fines. We have no problem with in-the-meat sales off the grid or any other system, but the price must be negotiated at the time of transaction, and the price reported along with all discounts and premiums. You want to know how long the cattle is? That's fine. Don't have to meet. First of all, you make the packer give the price like that in the report. The 38 pickup of purchase cattle should be mandatory reported to the same agency. Anytime the packer gets out in front of you, whether it's 30 days, 30 minutes, or whatever, it gives it an advantage in negotiations, price negotiations. You got it. The old saying in the industry is you keep the packer close to the knife. Keep him short of raw material, and he'll come to you. It increases your bargaining position. You let him get ahead of you, he'll outweigh you. He'll pick off the weak guy in the chain, and he'll publish it, and that becomes the market for everybody. In the old days, when you had a lot of packers, they caught the packer that was short. They traded with him, they set the market up, everybody's cattle became worth that. That's important, people. Okay, the packer should be barred from the short side of the live cattle futures market. This gives him unbelievable advantage. Packer buys a big inventory of cattle. Weak kill. He lays them off on the board. He doesn't care what he gets for that meat. He can throw that meat at the market, drive the price down. He always makes more money on down markets than he makes on up markets. Drives the market down, and then he really mows hay. Now, every time that packer buys an inventory of cattle, he ought to have to fight that retailer. That retailing industry is a concentrated industry too. He ought to have to fight to get that meat sold good. You got to make a meat salesman out of it. That's extremely important. Okay. Now this all takes some explanation. Live cattle futures should be cash settled. This delivery of these cattle is a joke. Every time we get heavy deliveries, they don't have to be very big, 100, 150 loads, you get a down limit day in the market. Nobody wants them. The longs don't want them. You can look at the open interest, and I know this is fairly complex, but when they deliver, it drives the cash market, futures market down every time, drives the cash market down right with it. Now, position limits in live cattle futures should be greatly reduced. Speculating position limits should be greatly reduced. And get down levels should be aligned with position limits. I noticed that John Lacey talked a little bit about this today. It's the first time I've heard NCBA talk about it, and I think they've been reading our mail. I'm happy that they are. We want to force the issue. The Federal Trade Commission should begin an immediate review of meat and poultry packing in this country to determine if it is fully competitive. We believe in beef packing. There should be no less than 10 beef packers, and none of the 10 should have more than 15% share of the market. Geographic spread would have to be considered. That's the recommendations we made to that commission. I hope so. Just floating the idea is important. Anything else up there, John? Oh yeah, this is about, you fellows took a trip in an XL jet the other day, is that right?
Yeah. Say, Jim, you got to finish up. I tell you what, we got a lot of people, and I know that he's interested. I've heard Jim speak before, and it's a great reluctance that I have to slow him down. But I tell you what, we got a lot of people that we got to go through, and I don't think it's fair to the others to have
I agree
one
with
person
you, Jerry.
speaking on.